A tall black man walked into the Whitmore mansion, wearing a cheap cook uniform and pretending he could barely hear. The three wealthy daughters laughed at the way he spoke. They mocked his silence. They treated him like he did not belong in their world. What they did not know was that the quiet cook standing in their kitchen held a secret powerful enough to destroy their family or save it. And if you were in their place, would you have treated him any differently? The Whitmore mansion stood on the edge of the Charleston coast, like something pulled out of an old American movie. White stone walls, tall glass windows. 6 black luxury cars lined outside the front entrance. On most nights, the house was quiet. But tonight, music floated through every hallway. Politicians were there. Investors were there. Local reporters stood near the fountain, hoping to catch pictures of the famous Whitmore family before midnight. Inside the ballroom, crystal lights hung from the ceiling like frozen stars, while servers moved carefully through the crowd, carrying silver trays filled with champagne and expensive seafood. Charles Whitmore loved nights like this. He stood near the center of the room, shaking hands with wealthy guests, while talking about business expansions in Florida and Texas. His wife Eleanor stood beside him wearing diamonds worth more than most people made in a lifetime. They looked perfect from far away. Powerful, untouchable, but their daughters carried a different kind of energy. Victoria Whitmore was the oldest. Cold eyes, perfect posture, the kind of woman who spoke to people like every second of her time cost money. Brooke Whitmore smiled more often, but her smile never stayed in her eyes. She cared about cameras, followers, attention. Madison was the loudest, the quickest to laugh, the quickest to insult someone too. Together, the three sisters moved through the ballroom like they owned every person inside it. Maybe because most of the time they did. Near the back entrance, a young black server walked carefully between guests carrying a tray of drinks. He looked nervous, maybe 20 years old, maybe younger. His hands shook slightly every time someone reached for a glass. Then it happened. One guest turned too quickly. The tray slipped. Champagne spilled across the front of a wealthy woman wearing white silk. The room went silent for half a second. The young server froze in fear. Victoria looked at him first. Her face hardened immediately. Seriously. That came out sharp enough to cut through the music. The boy started apologizing. "I am sorry, ma'am. I did not see." But Victoria stepped closer. "Maybe because you people never pay attention." Brooke pulled out her phone almost automatically. "Oh my God, this is insane." Madison laughed loudly beside her. "Charleston really hires anybody now, huh?" The boy lowered his head. His ears burned red from humiliation, while nearby guests pretended not to stare. Nobody stepped in. Nobody except Grace. Grace Whitmore moved quietly through the crowd and handed the young server a clean napkin. Her voice stayed soft. "Are you okay?" The boy nodded quickly without looking up. Grace then turned toward her sisters. "That's enough." Victoria rolled her eyes. "He embarrassed the family in front of investors." "He's scared already," Grace replied. Brooke shrugged while still holding her phone. "Relax. Nobody died." But Grace looked at the boy again, and somehow that made things worse. Because kindness in front of cruelty always reveals how ugly cruelty really is. Across the room, near the hallway leading to the kitchen, a tall black man stood silently watching everything. He wore a dark janitor jacket and an old baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Nobody paid attention to him. Nobody except Grace for one brief second. She noticed how calm he looked while everyone else reacted emotionally. Their eyes met only for a moment before he turned away and disappeared down the hallway. By the time the music returned and conversations continued, the young server had already been removed from the ballroom by management. Madison grabbed another glass from a passing tray. Dad seriously needs a better staff. Eleanor sighed heavily. We have had 3 kitchen disasters this month alone. Charles took a slow drink before answering. Our head chef quit yesterday. Brooke frowned. During charity season. That's amazing timing. Victoria crossed her arms. Then hire someone competent for once. Charles looked annoyed now. We are trying. But nobody lasts long in this house anymore. Grace glanced quietly toward the kitchen hallway again. For some reason, she thought about the tall man she saw standing there earlier. There was something strange about him. Not dangerous, just different. Like he had walked into the mansion already knowing things nobody else knew yet. Upstairs, the ocean wind pushed softly against the giant windows, while downstairs, another server whispered to a coworker that a new cook was arriving tomorrow morning. Nobody in the ballroom cared much about that news. To them, a cook was just another employee, another invisible person moving quietly around their expensive lives. But before the next week ended, every single person in that mansion would remember the name Marcus Hale. And the strangest part was this. He had already seen enough to know exactly what kind of family the Whitmores really were. The next morning, the Whitmore mansion looked calmer on the outside. The ocean rolled quietly behind the property. Garden workers trimmed hedges near the marble fountain. Expensive cars came and went through the front gates, like nothing unusual had happened the night before. But inside the house, tension already lived in the walls. Eleanor Whitmore stood in the dining room flipping through schedules while speaking sharply into her phone about charity meetings and investor lunches. Charles sat at the end of the table, reading business reports with tired eyes. Victoria drank coffee without looking up from her tablet. Brooke scrolled through comments on social media. Madison complained about having no decent breakfast because the old chef had left too suddenly. Grace sat quietly near the window, watching the rain clouds gathering over the water. Then the front door opened. A house manager walked in first. Behind him came the tall black man Grace had noticed the night before. This time she saw him clearly. He wore faded black pants, simple shoes, a dark kitchen jacket folded neatly over one arm. His shoulders were broad, his expression calm. There was something steady about him. Not proud, not nervous. Just steady. The manager cleared his throat. This is Marcus Hale. He is the temporary cook recommended by Mr. Reynolds from Savannah. Charles finally looked up. Marcus stepped forward slowly. Morning, sir. His voice came out low and rough. Eleanor studied him carefully. You worked in private homes before? Marcus nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Some. Victoria noticed the slight pause in his answer immediately. Her eyes narrowed. Some. That's your answer. Marcus looked toward her a second too late. Sorry, ma'am. Hearing not always good. Brooke almost smiled at that. Wait. His deaf. Partly Marcus replied quietly. Madison leaned back in her chair, already amused. Oh, this should be fun. Grace looked uncomfortable instantly. Eleanor folded her arms. We were not told about this. Marcus lowered his eyes slightly. Mr. Reynolds say I still do good work. Charles rubbed his chin. Can you handle a house this size? Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. I work hard. Victoria stood up and walked around him slowly, like she was inspecting a product before buying it. Then she spoke quickly on purpose. What's your experience with seafood preparation timing under pressure? Marcus blinked once. Sorry, ma'am. Speak again. Brooke laughed softly into her phone camera. Oh my God, he really can't hear. Victoria repeated herself louder this time with obvious irritation in her voice. Marcus answered calmly. I can cook seafood. Timing important. Madison let out a loud laugh. This man talks like a broken GPS. Grace finally spoke. Madison, stop. But Madison shrugged carelessly. What? I'm just saying. Brooke now openly pointed her phone toward Marcus. Guys, you are not going to believe this. Dad hired a half-deaf chef for this house. Marcus glanced toward the camera, but said nothing. That silence somehow annoyed Victoria, more than if he had argued back. She crossed her arms tighter. If you work here, you follow instructions fast. We entertain important people. Mistakes matter in this family. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. Brooke zoomed the phone slightly closer. Say something again. Marcus looked at her. Ma'am. Brooke laughed harder. Why does he sound like that? Grace stood up from her chair now. Brooke, enough. Put your phone down. Brooke rolled her eyes but lowered it anyway. Eleanor sighed heavily. Fine. You start today. We have guests Friday night. Do not embarrass this house. Marcus gave a short, respectful nod. I understand. The manager led him toward the kitchen wing, while Madison whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. At least if the food is bad, we can blame his ears. Brooke laughed again. Victoria did not laugh this time. She only watched Marcus walk away with a strange expression in her eyes, like she was already trying to figure him out. In the kitchen, Marcus quietly unpacked a small, worn bag into the corner locker assigned to him. 1 extra shirt, 2 kitchen towels, a notebook, nothing else. The kitchen staff barely noticed him at first, except for a skinny teenage helper named Eli, who introduced himself nervously while washing vegetables at the sink. Marcus greeted him kindly. Eli looked surprised by that simple respect alone. Upstairs, the sisters continued talking about the new cook over breakfast. Madison called him creepy. Brooke called him entertaining. Victoria said nothing for a long moment before finally speaking. Something about him feels off. Grace looked toward her. He's just trying to work. Victoria shook her head slowly. No. Men like that usually look nervous in houses like this. He doesn't. That observation stayed in Grace's mind longer than she expected, because Victoria was cruel sometimes, but she was rarely wrong about people. Late that evening, after the kitchen finally emptied and the mansion grew quiet, Marcus stepped outside through the back service entrance. The cold ocean air hit his face softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small phone, completely different from the cheap one clipped to his belt earlier. This one was sleek, private, secure. He dialed 1 number only. The call connected almost immediately. A calm male voice answered. Marcus looked back toward the glowing mansion windows before speaking quietly. I am inside now. Then he ended the call before anyone could ask another question. The next morning, the Whitmore mansion looked calmer on the outside. The ocean rolled quietly behind the property. Garden workers trimmed hedges near the marble fountain. Expensive cars came and went through the front gates like nothing unusual had happened the night before. But inside the house, tension already lived in the walls. Eleanor Whitmore stood in the dining room, flipping through schedules while speaking sharply into her phone about charity meetings and investor lunches. Charles sat at the end of the table reading business reports with tired eyes. Victoria drank coffee without looking up from her tablet. Brooke scrolled through comments on social media. Madison complained about having no decent breakfast because the old chef had left too suddenly. Grace sat quietly near the window, watching the rain clouds gathering over the water. Then the front door opened. A house manager walked in first. Behind him came the tall black man Grace had noticed the night before. This time she saw him clearly. He wore faded black pants, simple shoes, a dark kitchen jacket folded neatly over one arm. His shoulders were broad, his expression calm. There was something steady about him. Not proud, not nervous, just steady. The manager cleared his throat. "This is Marcus Hale. He is the temporary cook, recommended by Mr. Reynolds from Savannah." Charles finally looked up. Marcus stepped forward slowly. "Morning, sir." His voice came out low and rough. Eleanor studied him carefully. "You worked in private homes before?" Marcus nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." "Some." Victoria noticed the slight pause in his answer immediately. Her eyes narrowed. "Some." "That's your answer." Marcus looked toward her a second too late. "Sorry, ma'am. Hearing not always good." Brooke almost smiled at that. "Wait. His deaf." Partly, Marcus replied quietly. Madison leaned back in her chair, already amused. "Oh, this should be fun." Grace looked uncomfortable instantly. Eleanor folded her arms. "We were not told about this." Marcus lowered his eyes slightly. "Mr. Reynolds say I still do good work." Charles rubbed his chin. "Can you handle a house this size?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. I work hard." Victoria stood up and walked around him slowly like she was inspecting a product before buying it. Then she spoke quickly on purpose. "What's your experience with seafood preparation timing under pressure?" Marcus blinked once. "Sorry, ma'am. Speak again." Brooke laughed softly into her phone camera. "Oh my God, he really can't hear." Victoria repeated herself louder this time, with obvious irritation in her voice. Marcus answered calmly. "I can cook seafood. Timing important." Madison let out a loud laugh. "This man talks like a broken GPS." Grace finally spoke. "Madison, stop." But Madison shrugged carelessly. "What?" "I'm just saying." Brooke now openly pointed her phone toward Marcus. "Guys, you are not going to believe this. Dad hired a half-deaf chef for this house." Marcus glanced toward the camera, but said nothing. That silence somehow annoyed Victoria more than if he had argued back. She crossed her arms tighter. "If you work here, you follow instructions fast. We entertain important people. Mistakes matter in this family." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." Brooke zoomed the phone slightly closer. "Say something again." Marcus looked at her. "Ma'am." Brooke laughed harder. "Why does he sound like that?" Grace stood up from her chair now. "Brooke, enough. Put your phone down." Brooke rolled her eyes, but lowered it anyway. Eleanor sighed heavily. "Fine. You start today. We have guests Friday night. Do not embarrass this house." Marcus gave a short, respectful nod. "I understand." The manager led him toward the kitchen wing, while Madison whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "At least if the food is bad, we can blame his ears." Brooke laughed again. Victoria did not laugh this time. She only watched Marcus walk away with a strange expression in her eyes, like she was already trying to figure him out. In the kitchen, Marcus quietly unpacked a small, worn bag into the corner locker assigned to him. One extra shirt, 2 kitchen towels, a notebook, nothing else. The kitchen staff barely noticed him at first, except for a skinny teenage helper named Eli, who introduced himself nervously while washing vegetables at the sink. Marcus greeted him kindly. Eli looked surprised by that simple respect alone. Upstairs, the sisters continued talking about the new cook over breakfast. Madison called him creepy. Brooke called him entertaining. Victoria said nothing for a long moment before finally speaking. "Something about him feels off." Grace looked toward her. He's just trying to work. Victoria shook her head slowly. No. Men like that usually look nervous in houses like this. He doesn't. That observation stayed in Grace's mind longer than she expected, because Victoria was cruel sometimes, but she was rarely wrong about people. Late that evening, after the kitchen finally emptied and the mansion grew quiet, Marcus stepped outside through the back service entrance. The cold ocean air hit his face softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small phone, completely different from the cheap one clipped to his belt earlier. This one was sleek, private, secure. He dialed one number only. The call connected almost immediately. A calm male voice answered. Marcus looked back toward the glowing mansion windows before speaking quietly. I am inside now. Then he ended the call before anyone could ask another question. 3 days after Marcus arrived, the kitchen inside the Whitmore mansion no longer felt cold. Before him, people rushed around in silence. Nobody smiled. Nobody spoke unless they had to. But Marcus worked differently. Calm hands, quiet voice, no panic. Even Eli noticed it. The young kitchen helper stopped shaking every time he carried plates. One Friday evening, Charles Whitmore hosted an important dinner for investors from Atlanta. Eleanor wanted everything perfect. Victoria checked the table settings 3 times. Brooke cared more about taking pictures than eating. Madison complained the whole night sounded boring. Downstairs, Marcus cooked alone with Eli helping beside him. Butter hissed softly in the pan. Fresh bread baked in the oven. Garlic and herbs filled the kitchen with warmth that the mansion itself somehow never had. Marcus moved smoothly between the stove and the counter without wasting motion. Eli watched him carefully. You cook like those TV chefs. Marcus smiled faintly. TV chefs talk too much. Upstairs, dinner started quietly. Then something changed. One investor stopped eating just to look down at his plate. Another guest asked who made the lamb. Charles took another bite before slowly nodding. This is the best dinner we have had here in months. Eleanor looked surprised, but agreed. Even she could not deny it. Brooke rolled her eyes immediately. It's just food. Madison laughed. Dad acts emotional over mashed potatoes. But Victoria stayed silent, watching, thinking. Grace noticed that. She also noticed something else. Marcus never came upstairs to accept praise. He stayed in the kitchen washing dishes while wealthy people complimented his work from another room. Later that night, Charles entered the kitchen unexpectedly. Eli almost dropped a tray from shock. Charles looked directly at Marcus. Dinner was excellent tonight. Marcus wiped his hands slowly. Thank you, sir. Charles gave one short nod before leaving again. Eli stared at Marcus after the door closed. Mr. Whitmore never compliments staff. Marcus returned to cleaning the counter. Some people only speak when something surprises them. The next morning, Grace walked into the kitchen early. Marcus was cutting vegetables while old jazz music played quietly from a radio near the sink. Sunlight came through the windows. For once, the mansion felt peaceful. Grace stood there a second before speaking. You really are good at this. Marcus kept slicing carrots carefully. Cooking easy. People difficult. That made Grace smile a little. She moved closer. Can I help? Marcus paused like he was not used to hearing that question from people like her. Then he handed her green beans. Wash these first. Grace rolled up her sleeves and started helping him quietly. The kitchen stayed silent except for running water and the sound of knives against wood. After a while, Grace finally spoke again. My sisters should not have treated you badly. Marcus shrugged slightly. People show their hearts fast when they think somebody beneath them. Grace looked down at the sink. They are not always bad people. Marcus nodded once. Maybe. Then he said softly, "Big house not always mean big hearts." Grace stopped moving for a second after hearing that, because deep down, she knew he was right. Before she could answer, Madison's voice echoed loudly from upstairs, asking where breakfast was. The moment disappeared, but something small had already changed inside Grace. For the first time, she stopped seeing Marcus as just the cook. By the second week, the insults became smaller, but somehow they hurt more. They did not shout every time. They did not always laugh in his face. They simply reminded Marcus again and again that in the Whitmore mansion, some people were treated like guests, and some people were treated like furniture. Victoria was the first to make it a habit. One afternoon, she called Marcus into the sunroom and asked for tea. Marcus brought it in under 5 minutes. She was standing by the window, speaking on the phone. She raised one finger without looking at him. So he stood there. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. The tea cooled on the tray. Victoria kept talking as if he did not exist. Grace walked past once and slowed down, but Marcus gave the smallest shake of his head. Not now. After 20 minutes, Victoria ended the call, looked at the tray, and frowned. "It's cold." Marcus lowered his eyes. "I can make another pot." Victoria smiled without warmth. "Good. Then next time, learn timing." She did not say thank you. She did not have to. Not in her world. Brooke chose a different way to cut him. She turned him into content. One morning, Marcus was kneading dough when Brooke walked into the kitchen holding her phone high. "Okay, guys, this is our new private chef. He is very mysterious. He barely talks. He barely hears. And somehow my dad thinks he is a genius." Marcus kept working. Eli looked uncomfortable near the sink. Brooke moved closer. "Marcus, can you say good morning to my followers?" Marcus did not answer right away. Maybe because he was pretending not to hear. Maybe because he was deciding whether silence was safer than dignity. Brooke laughed softly at the screen. "See, this is what I mean. He is like a character." Grace stepped in from the hallway. "Brooke, stop filming him." Brooke lowered the phone with a bored sigh. "You ruin everything." Grace looked at Marcus. "Are you okay?" Marcus only nodded, but his hands pressed harder into the dough. Madison was the cruelest when she was bored. She came into the kitchen after a workout, sweaty and irritated, holding a clean apron Marcus had left folded on a chair. She tossed it onto the floor near his feet. "You left your little costume upstairs." Marcus looked at the apron, then at Madison. Eli froze. Grace was not there this time. Nobody was. Madison folded her arms. "Pick it up." Marcus bent slowly. His fingers touched the white cloth, and for 1 second, he was not in the Whitmore kitchen anymore. He was 7 years old again, standing behind his mother in a house outside Atlanta. His mother, Denise Hale, had worked there cleaning floors. A white woman had once dropped a few dollar bills onto the ground instead of placing them in her hand. Denise had picked them up quietly. Later that night, she told Marcus, "Son, never let the world make your heart dirty, just because it throws dirt at your feet." Back in the kitchen, Marcus lifted the apron and folded it carefully. Madison scoffed. "You people really do just take anything." Marcus looked at her then. Not angry, not loud, just steady. "I heard you." Madison blinked. For the first time, she seemed unsure whether he had missed her words or understood every one of them. That evening, Marcus stood alone in the pantry with the door half closed. His jaw tightened. He could leave. He had walked away from bigger rooms than this. He had ended deals with louder men. He had sat across from billionaires who smiled with clean teeth and dirty intentions. But this was different. This house had history. This family had influence. And Hale Horizon Capital was already studying whether to buy a controlling stake in Whitmore development before its debt swallowed it whole. Marcus was not here for wages. He was here to see the truth up close, not the reports, not the public image, the truth. How did the Whitmores treat people when cameras were gone? How did they act when they believed someone had no power? That was the real audit, and so far, the numbers were ugly. Later that night, Grace found the folded apron placed neatly beside the sink. She saw the flour still on Marcus' hands. She saw the quiet anger he kept buried behind his calm face. She did not ask what happened. She only said, "I am sorry for this house." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he answered softly, "A house can be repaired. People have to choose it." Grace did not forget that. By the second week, the insults no longer came loudly. They came in small ways, quiet ways, the kind that looked harmless to anyone who did not have to swallow them. Victoria was the first to begin. One afternoon, she called Marcus to the sunroom and asked for tea. Marcus brought it in 5 minutes. She did not touch the cup. She kept reading a magazine as if he were not standing there. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Marcus stood beside the door with his hands folded. Finally, Victoria looked up and said the tea was cold. "Make it again." Marcus nodded and took the tray back. No argument, no anger, just silence. Brooke was worse in a different way. She came into the kitchen with her phone raised and started recording while Marcus chopped vegetables. "My family hired this super mysterious chef," she said to the camera. "He barely talks. He barely hears. But apparently, he makes rich people food now." Eli looked down, embarrassed for him. Marcus kept cutting. Brooke moved closer. "Marcus, say hi to my followers." Marcus looked at her slowly. "Sorry, ma'am." Brooke laughed. "See, this is what I mean." Grace walked in just then. "Brooke, stop recording him." Brooke rolled her eyes, but lowered the phone. "You are so sensitive. He works here." Grace looked at Marcus, then back at her sister. "Working here does not make him entertainment." That sentence stayed in the room after Brooke left. But Madison did not care about lessons. That evening, she came into the kitchen angry because her salad had onions in it. Marcus explained calmly that she had requested onions the night before. Madison grabbed the clean apron from the counter and threw it onto the floor. "Then pick it up and listen better next time." The kitchen went still. Eli froze near the sink. Grace was not there. No one stopped it. Marcus looked down at the apron. For a moment, he did not move. Not because the apron mattered, but because the gesture did. In his mind, he was 8 years old again, standing in a laundry room in Atlanta, while his mother bent to pick up dollar bills a rich woman had dropped on the floor instead of handing them to her. He still remembered his mother's face, not crying, not angry, just tired, in a way a child should never have to understand. Marcus bent down and picked up the apron. Slowly, carefully. Madison smirked like she had won something, but she had not. She had only shown him who she was. Later that night, Marcus sat alone in the service courtyard behind the mansion. The ocean wind moved through the palm trees. His hand rested on the same apron, now folded neatly beside him. Eli came out with 2 bottles of water. "You okay?" Marcus took one. "I am fine." Eli shook his head. People always say that when they are not. Marcus looked at the boy for a second, then smiled faintly. You learn fast. Eli sat on the step beside him. Why do you stay? Marcus did not answer right away. He looked at the mansion windows glowing above them. Because sometimes you need to see the inside of a house before you decide whether to repair it or tear it down. Eli frowned, not fully understanding. Marcus changed the subject. Go sleep. Morning comes early. After Eli left, Marcus pulled out the secure phone from his pocket. One message waited on the screen from Samuel Reed. Full acquisition file ready. Whitmore board vulnerable. Final character assessment needed. Marcus stared at those words for a long time. This was never about a kitchen job. It was never about wages. Hale Horizon Capital was preparing to buy a controlling stake in Charles Whitmore's struggling company. Marcus could end the Whitmore name with one signature. But he had promised himself one thing before making that decision. He would see the family up close, not in interviews, not in reports, not through lawyers. He would see how they treated people who had nothing to offer them. So far, Grace had been the only light in that house, and that made the next choice much harder than revenge. By the third week, something strange began to happen inside the Whitmore mansion. The same sisters who once laughed at Marcus now started looking for reasons to walk near the kitchen. They did not admit it, not even to themselves, but it was there. Small at first, quiet, almost embarrassing. Victoria noticed him first in the hallway outside the dining room. Marcus was carrying a heavy box of groceries from the back entrance. One of the handles broke, and cans rolled across the marble floor. A maid rushed over, nervous and apologizing before she had even done anything wrong. Marcus did not snap. He did not blame her. He simply lowered the box, knelt down, and helped her pick up every can. Victoria stood at the end of the hall watching him. Most men she knew performed kindness when someone important was looking. Marcus did not even know she was there. That bothered her more than it should have. Later that afternoon, she asked for coffee and then told him to stay while she reviewed a guest list. Marcus stood near the doorway, quiet as always. Victoria read names aloud too fast on purpose, testing whether he would miss them. He did, or at least he pretended to. She corrected him sharply, but instead of feeling powerful, she felt foolish. His calm made her cruelty look small. Brooke changed in a different way. At first, she only wanted content. Then, she wanted reaction. She would come into the kitchen with her phone in her hand, pretending to record the food, but really watching Marcus' face. When she praised a dish, he only nodded. When she joked, he rarely laughed. When she asked if he had seen her latest charity post, he said he did not use social media much. That stung her. Brooke Whitmore was used to being watched. Marcus made her feel invisible. So she tried harder. One morning, she brought him a coffee from town, the expensive kind with foam art on top. Marcus looked at it and said thank you, but gave it to Eli because the boy had been working since sunrise. Brooke smiled like she did not care, but her cheeks tightened. Madison noticed Marcus for a simpler reason. She saw him protect someone. Eli had dropped a tray of plates near the pantry, and the house manager came at him hard. The boy froze. His face went pale. Before the manager could keep shouting, Marcus stepped between them. His voice stayed low, but it carried weight. He said the floor was wet because a pipe under the sink had been leaking. He said Eli had warned someone twice. He said blaming a kid was easier than fixing the problem. The manager backed down. Eli looked like he might cry. Madison had walked in ready to complain about lunch. Instead, she stopped by the door and watched. For the first time, she saw Marcus not as a servant, not as entertainment, but as a man who could stand firm without raising his voice. That unsettled her. After that, the sisters began circling the kitchen like they were strangers to their own house. Victoria asked questions about meals she had never cared about before. Brooke came down to taste sauces and pretended it was for her followers. Madison started giving small instructions that made no sense, just so Marcus would look at her. And Grace saw all of it. She saw the way Victoria held her silence too long when Marcus entered a room. She saw Brooke laugh louder than usual near the stove. She saw Madison become rude whenever she felt nervous. Grace did not feel jealous. Not exactly. She felt uneasy. Because her sisters were not learning to respect Marcus. They were learning to want his attention. That was not the same thing. Marcus saw it too. He saw Victoria testing his mind. He saw Brooke testing her charm. He saw Madison testing his patience. And each time, he reminded himself why he had come. He was there to observe, to measure character, to decide whether the Whitmore family deserved saving or exposure. But people were never as simple up close as they looked on paper. Victoria was proud, yes, but behind that pride was fear of becoming useless. Brooke was vain, yes, but under the camera smile was a woman terrified of being forgotten. Madison was cruel, yes, but sometimes cruelty was just panic wearing loud shoes. And Grace was different. She did not come to perform. She came to help. She asked real questions. She listened to real answers. That made her the most dangerous one of all, because she made Marcus forget the role he was playing. One night, after everyone had gone upstairs, Marcus stood alone in the kitchen staring at the dark window above the sink. His reflection looked back at him. Cook jacket, tired eyes, a man pretending to be smaller than he was. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Samuel Reed appeared. Board pressure increasing. Need your recommendation soon. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. The plan had been simple. Enter the house, watch the family, make the decision. But now the house was changing around him, and worse, he was changing inside it. One Tuesday afternoon, the Whitmore mansion turned strangely quiet. Charles was out at a business meeting. Eleanor was upstairs arguing with decorators about flower arrangements. Brooke was filming another luxury lifestyle video near the pool. Victoria worked inside the library. Madison wandered through the house looking bored, which usually meant trouble for someone else. Downstairs, Marcus prepared dinner with Eli beside him. The kitchen smelled like warm bread and chicken soup. Marcus always cooked extra food for the staff. Real meals, not leftovers thrown onto plates. Eli noticed that from the beginning. Marcus treated workers like human beings, not background noise. Around 4 in the afternoon, Eli quietly grabbed a paper bag from the counter and moved toward the back door. He thought nobody saw him. But Madison did. She stepped into the hallway and narrowed her eyes immediately. "What is that?" Eli froze. "Nothing, ma'am." Madison walked over fast and snatched the bag from his hands. Inside were 2 containers of soup, bread rolls, and a slice of peach cake wrapped carefully in foil. Madison laughed sharply. "Wow, the kitchen boy is stealing now." Eli panicked instantly. "No, ma'am, I was bringing it home." Madison raised her voice louder on purpose. "Bringing stolen food home is still stealing." Marcus turned from the stove. His face stayed calm, but his eyes sharpened slightly. "Keep your voice down." Madison looked shocked. He spoke back at all. "Excuse me." Marcus stepped closer to Eli. The boy scared already. "No need make worse." By then, Brooke had walked in holding her phone. Victoria followed behind her. Grace came last after hearing the shouting from upstairs. Madison held up the bag like evidence. He stole food from the kitchen. Brooke looked uncomfortable for once. Victoria crossed her arms immediately. Rules exist for a reason. Eli looked down at the floor. His hands shook badly now. Marcus stayed beside him without touching him. Just standing there. Quiet support. Charles arrived home minutes later and walked directly into the tension. "What happened?" Madison answered first before anyone else could speak. "Your kitchen helper was stealing from us." Charles looked disappointed, more than angry. "Eli, is that true?" Eli swallowed hard. Tears already filled his eyes. "I was taking food home, sir." Charles sighed heavily. "We gave you work here. Why would you do this?" Grace stepped forward softly. "Dad, maybe there is more to it." Madison rolled her eyes. "Food does not walk into bags by itself, Grace." Grace ignored her and looked at Eli. Who was the food for? Eli stayed silent at first. Marcus watched him carefully but did not answer for him. Finally, Eli whispered, "My little sister." The room suddenly felt different, quieter. Eli wiped his eyes fast, embarrassed to cry in front of wealthy people. Her name, Lily. She 9 years old. She stays with my aunt. Sometimes there's not enough food there. I only took what nobody here was eating. I swear. Brooke slowly lowered her phone. Victoria looked away for a second. Even Madison stopped talking. Charles folded his arms tightly. "That still does not excuse taking things without permission." Marcus nodded once. "No, sir. It does not." Then he looked directly at Charles. "But hungry people make desperate choices." Charles' face hardened slightly. "This is not your business, Marcus." Marcus answered calmly. "Maybe not, but character is everybody's business." Silence filled the kitchen again. Marcus looked around at the giant refrigerators full of expensive food, at polished marble counters, at flowers worth hundreds of dollars sitting untouched near the dining room entrance. Then he spoke quietly. "Did anyone ask who waiting for this boy at home?" Nobody answered. Marcus continued softly. "Did anyone ask if he already ate today before serving dinner in this house?" Eli began crying silently after hearing that. Grace moved beside him and rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. Charles looked at the boy for a long moment before finally exhaling. "From now on, you ask first. Understand?" Eli nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Charles turned toward the house manager. "Set aside unused food properly every night. If extra remains, send it through the community kitchen program." Then he looked back at Marcus. "Since you care so much, you organize it." Marcus lowered his head slightly. "Gladly." Madison left the room first. Brooke followed quietly behind her. Victoria stayed near the doorway a second longer, staring at Marcus with a strange expression she could not hide anymore. That night, Grace found Eli outside holding a fresh food container with Lily written carefully on the lid in black marker. Marcus had packed it himself. 2 days after the incident with Eli, Brooke decided the Whitmore family needed a softer image. Not a real change. An image. She sat by the pool with her laptop open, scrolling through angry comments about rich families, spoiled daughters, and people who treated workers badly. None of those comments mentioned the Whitmores yet. But Brooke knew how fast the internet could turn. So she created a plan. A live charity stream. Beautiful lighting. Soft music. A tour of the mansion kitchen. A few words about community meals. And Marcus. Especially Marcus. In Brooke's mind, he was perfect for the story she wanted to sell. Quiet black cook, humble background, working in a wealthy home. helping the family support local people. It would look generous. It would look human. It would look exactly like the kind of content that made strangers call her inspiring. That afternoon, she walked into the kitchen wearing a white dress and holding her phone on a stabilizer. Marcus was cutting herbs near the stove. Eli was stacking clean containers for the community kitchen program Charles had approved. Brooke smiled too brightly. Today we are showing people the heart behind our home. Marcus did not look up right away. Eli glanced at him nervously. Brooke moved closer. Marcus, I want you in the live stream for a few minutes. Just stand beside me and talk about the meals. Marcus kept chopping. No, Mom. Brooke blinked. No. Marcus nodded. I do not want to be filmed. Brooke laughed like she thought he was joking. You barely have to speak. Just smile. It will help the program. Marcus placed the knife down carefully. If the program good, it should stand without using my face. That answer hit Brooke harder than she expected. Her smile tightened. Excuse me. Marcus looked at her calmly. I said no. Brooke stared at him, embarrassed because Eli had heard it. Then she turned away and started the live stream anyway from the pantry area. Her voice changed immediately. Warm. Sweet. Perfect for the camera. She talked about kindness, about responsibility, about how the Whitmore family believed no child should go hungry. Viewers sent hearts. Comments moved fast. Brooke smiled wider. But every few seconds her eyes cut toward Marcus, who continued working outside the frame. Grace entered halfway through and stopped when she saw the phone. Brooke, did Marcus agree to be filmed? Brooke kept smiling at the screen. We are just sharing something positive. Grace's voice stayed low. That is not an answer. Brooke ended the live stream segment sooner than planned. The moment the phone went down, her face changed. She turned toward Marcus with anger she could no longer hide. Do you know how ungrateful that looked? Marcus wiped his hands on a towel. I am here to cook. Brooke stepped closer. You work in one of the most powerful homes in South Carolina. Do you understand what that kind of exposure could do for someone like you? Eli froze near the sink. Grace went still. Marcus said nothing. Brooke kept going. Softer, but uglier now. People like you usually beg to be seen. I offered you a chance to look important for once. Grace said her name sharply. Brooke! But it was too late. Eli had already pressed record on his small phone when Brooke's voice first changed. Not because he wanted trouble. Because after years of not being believed, he had learned that proof mattered. Marcus looked at Eli and gave the smallest shake of his head, but the damage was done. Later that night, only a short clip appeared online from an anonymous account. It did not show the whole kitchen. It did not show private rooms. It only carried Brooke's voice, clear enough for anyone to understand. People like you usually beg to be seen. Within an hour, the clip had been shared across Charleston community pages. By midnight, strangers were asking why the daughter of a billionaire was speaking to a black employee like that. By morning, reporters were calling Charles' office. Brooke woke up to thousands of comments. Not praise, not hearts. Anger, disappointment. People reposted old clips where she used staff as background props. They questioned the charity stream. They questioned the family. They questioned the Whitmore name. At breakfast, Charles slammed his phone on the table. What is this? Brooke's face was pale. It was taken out of context. Grace looked at her sadly. Was it? Eleanor pressed a hand to her forehead. This is a disaster. Victoria watched Brooke with cold frustration. Madison said nothing. which was rare for her. Downstairs, Marcus cooked breakfast as usual, calm, silent. Eli stood beside him looking guilty. "I did not mean for it to get that big." Marcus stirred the pot slowly. "Truth does not ask permission before it travels." Eli swallowed. "Are you mad at me?" Marcus looked at him. "I am worried about what this house does when embarrassed." Upstairs, Brooke stared at the same clip playing again and again on her screen. For the first time, the camera had not protected her. It had revealed her. After Brooke clips spread online, the Whitmore mansion became quieter than before. Not peaceful, just careful. Staff lowered their voices. Eleanor stayed close to her phone, waiting for another bad call. Charles spent hours in his office with the door shut. Brooke cried once, then denied crying. Madison acted bored, but she stopped making jokes near the kitchen. Only Victoria became sharper. She did not panic like the others. She investigated. That was what she always did when something threatened the family name. At first, she told herself Marcus was just a problem employee. Too calm, too private, too comfortable saying no. Then one afternoon, she passed the pantry hallway and saw him alone at the small staff table. He was not cooking. He was reading. In front of him sat a printed financial report with highlighted lines, debt ratios, property exposure numbers, and board voting percentages. Victoria stopped so suddenly, her heel clicked against the floor. Marcus looked up. For 1 second, his eyes were clear. Too clear. Then his face softened back into the quiet cook she knew. Victoria stepped closer. "What is that?" Marcus folded the papers slowly. "Just reading, Mom." She reached out. "Let me see." Marcus did not move fast, but he moved first. He slipped the report into a plain envelope and placed it beside him. "Not mine to share." Victoria stared at him. "You read corporate finance reports for fun." Marcus lowered his eyes, trying to learn. That answer should have sounded humble. It did not. It sounded prepared. Victoria leaned closer. "Who are you, really?" Marcus looked at her, like he had not heard the question. "Sorry, ma'am." She almost laughed, but nothing about it felt funny. That night, Victoria called a private investigator she had used years earlier after a failed engagement. She gave him Marcus' name, approximate age, and the little employment information the house manager had on file. The investigator called back the next afternoon, sounding annoyed. "There is almost nothing clean on him," he said. "What do you mean, nothing?" "I mean either your cook barely exists, or someone buried what matters." Victoria stood by her bedroom window, looking down toward the kitchen courtyard. "That is impossible. People do not just disappear." The man replied, "Poor people do not. Powerful people do." The sentence stayed with her. Downstairs, Marcus continued working like nothing had changed. He made breakfast. He packed food for the community program. He helped Eli fix a loose shelf. He listened when Grace asked about soup stock and why bones needed time to give flavor. But Victoria watched every move now. She noticed his hands, not soft, but not careless. She noticed his speech change slightly when he forgot to perform. She noticed he understood questions before pretending not to hear them. Her suspicion became fear when Charles received a call during dinner. His face changed before he even stood up. He left the table without explanation. Eleanor followed him. The sisters sat in awkward silence until raised voices came from the office. Grace looked toward the hallway. Brooke whispered, "What now?" Victoria was already standing. She reached the office door just as Charles said, "A controlling position. Are you sure?" Eleanor's voice shook. "Who is behind it?" The lawyer on speaker answered clearly enough for Victoria to hear. The acquisition vehicle is called Hale Horizon Capital. Victoria felt the air leave her chest. Hale. The name hit her like a hand on the shoulder. Marcus Hale. The quiet cook. The man in the kitchen. The man she had mocked. The man she had tried to study like staff. She stepped back from the door before anyone saw her. Her mind moved fast now. Too fast. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe Hale was common enough. Maybe she was becoming paranoid. But deep down, she did not believe that. Later that night, Victoria went downstairs alone. The kitchen lights were low. Marcus was there, wiping the counter with slow, steady movements. He did not look surprised to see her. That bothered her most. She stood by the doorway and said his name. Marcus. He turned. Yes, ma'am. She watched his face carefully. Hale Horizon Capital. Does that mean anything to you? For the first time since entering the mansion, Marcus paused a little too long. Not enough for most people to notice. But Victoria noticed everything. Then he answered softly. Sounds like business. Victoria stepped closer. My father company is being targeted by a fund with your name on it. Marcus set the towel down. Many people have my name. She shook her head. Not many people read our board structure in the pantry. The room went very still. Marcus did not deny it. He only looked at her. Calm. Tired. Almost disappointed. Victoria's voice dropped. Are you here to hurt us? Marcus looked toward the hallway, where Grace's voice could faintly be heard upstairs, speaking to Eli about the community food boxes. Then he turned back to Victoria. I am here to find out if this family knows the difference between being rich and being worthy. Victoria had no answer. For once, her pride gave her nothing to say. After Victoria heard the name Hale Horizon Capital, the atmosphere inside the Whitmore mansion changed again. Nobody said it openly, but fear had entered the house. Charles spent longer hours behind closed office doors. Eleanor stopped hosting lunches with her friends. Brooke avoided social media for the first time in years. Madison became restless, angry, defensive, and Marcus kept cooking like nothing around him was falling apart. That calm started bothering Madison more than anything else. One rainy evening, she stormed out of the mansion after fighting with Eleanor about the family scandal. Grace heard shouting from upstairs. Doors slammed. Then came the sound of Madison's car roaring out of the driveway too fast. Marcus looked up immediately from the kitchen sink. Eli stood near the back entrance holding a box of food containers for the community kitchen delivery. Rain poured hard outside now. The long driveway had become slick and dark. Grace walked quickly into the kitchen. Did Madison leave angry again? Before Marcus could answer, headlights suddenly flashed across the rain-soaked windows, far too fast. Eli stepped outside at the exact wrong moment, carrying the box in both hands. Everything happened in seconds. Tires screamed against wet pavement. Madison's black SUV slid sideways near the service entrance. Eli froze in the middle of the driveway, blinded by headlights. Grace screamed his name. Marcus moved before anyone else did. He lunged through the rain and shoved Eli hard toward the grass, just as the SUV spun past them. Eli hit the ground safely. Marcus did not. The side mirror slammed into his shoulder and threw him against the stone edge of the walkway. The sound made Grace's stomach drop instantly. Madison hit the brakes too late. The SUV stopped crooked near the fountain while rain hammered the roof. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then Grace ran first. Marcus. Eli scrambled up, shaking violently. Blood mixed with rain near Marcus' forehead. His left arm twisted awkwardly beneath him. But even hurt, His first words were not about himself. "Eli, okay?" Grace nodded quickly, tears already in her eyes. "He okay?" Madison stepped out of the SUV, pale with shock. She looked at Marcus on the ground. Then she looked toward the mansion windows. "Oh my God. Oh my God." Grace stood up, furious. "You almost killed him." Madison snapped back immediately, fear turning into defensiveness. It was raining. He ran into the driveway. Grace could not believe what she was hearing. Marcus slowly pushed himself upright with visible pain. His shoulder trembled slightly from the impact. Eli looked devastated. "I am sorry. I should not have gone outside." Marcus shook his head once. "Not your fault." Madison kept pacing near the car. "If Dad finds out I lost control of the car because I was upset after another family fight, he is going to lose it." Grace stared at her in disbelief. "That what you worried about right now?" Madison's face hardened instantly because shame often hides behind anger. "Do not start acting perfect, Grace." Marcus finally stood fully, though. Pain flashed across his face for a second. Rain soaked through his dark shirt. Blood ran slowly near his temple. But his voice stayed calm. "Enough." Grace turned toward him immediately. "You need a hospital." Marcus nodded slightly. "Just shoulder, maybe." Eli looked close to crying again. Marcus rested his good hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. "You alive. That what matters." Something about those words hit Grace deeply because Marcus had every reason to be angry, yet he still protected everyone else first. Even Madison. Especially Madison. Later that night, Grace cleaned the cut near Marcus' forehead in the small downstairs sitting room, while the mansion stayed unusually silent. Madison locked herself in her bedroom. Brooke avoided everyone. Charles still had not returned home. Marcus sat quietly while Grace wrapped his shoulder carefully. "You should tell my father exactly what happened," she whispered. Marcus looked down at the floor. "Maybe." Grace stopped for a second. "Maybe." Marcus leaned back slowly, pain visible now that nobody else was watching. "Your sister made mistake." Grace shook her head. "She could have killed Eli." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "I know." Silence filled the room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Grace asked the question she had been afraid to say out loud. "Are you going to destroy my family?" Marcus opened his eyes and looked at her. Not angry, not cold. Just tired. "I came here thinking people should pay for what they become." Grace listened quietly. Marcus continued. "Some deserve it. Some maybe just lost their way." Grace lowered her eyes. "And us." Marcus did not answer immediately, because the truth was harder now. When he first entered the mansion, revenge had felt clean. Simple. The Whitmores represented every rich family that had once looked through his mother like she was invisible. Every powerful person who thought kindness only mattered when cameras were watching. But now things were blurred. Grace kindness was real. Eli's future mattered. Even Victoria had begun questioning herself. Only Madison still clung to pride when faced with pain. Marcus stared at the storm outside. His phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. Another message from Samuel Reed. "Final approval ready. Acquisition can proceed tomorrow morning." Marcus read the message twice. One decision. That was all it would take. He could ruin the Whitmore empire before sunrise. Grace noticed the conflict in his face. "You do not look like someone who enjoys hurting people," she said softly. Marcus gave the faintest smile. "Neither did my mother." That sentence stayed between them long after the room became quiet again. The final dinner was supposed to save the Whitmore name. Eleanor called it a private appreciation night. Charles called it damage control. Victoria called it necessary. Brooke called it a nightmare. Madison said nothing. Since the accident, she had barely looked Marcus in the eye. By 7 that evening, the ballroom looked perfect again. White flowers, gold candles, soft piano music. Local donors, board members, and 2 reporters stood near the windows with champagne glasses in their hands. Everything looked polished, but under the polish, the house was shaking. Marcus worked in the kitchen with his injured shoulder wrapped beneath his jacket. Grace noticed the pain in his face when he lifted a tray, but he refused help twice. Eli stayed close to him, not because Marcus needed protection, but because Eli did not want him standing alone anymore. Upstairs, Charles prepared a short speech about responsibility and community values. Eleanor kept checking whether Brooke would apologize publicly. Victoria watched the front door. She had not slept well since hearing the name Hale Horizon Capital. Something was coming. She could feel it. Dinner began smoothly. Guests praised the food. Charles smiled when he needed to. Brooke stood beside Eleanor with a pale face. Madison kept her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Grace said little, but her eyes kept drifting toward the kitchen doors. Then the front entrance opened. A man in a dark suit walked in with a leather folder under one arm. He was calm, clean, and serious. Charles recognized him first. Samuel Reed. His company lawyer had mentioned that name once. Victoria went still. Samuel crossed the ballroom without asking permission and stopped near the dining room entrance, where Marcus had just stepped out carrying a silver tray. For one sharp second, nobody understood why Samuel had come. Then Samuel turned toward Marcus and said clearly, "Good evening, Mr. Hale." The room changed instantly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just deeply, like every candle had gone cold at the same time. Marcus did not answer right away. He placed the tray on the side table. Slowly, carefully. Then he reached behind his neck and untied the white kitchen apron. Brooke stared. Madison opened her mouth, but no words came out. Eleanor gripped the back of a chair. Charles looked from Samuel to Marcus, confusion turning into dread. Victoria whispered almost to herself, "I knew it." Marcus folded the apron once and set it down. When he looked up again, the quiet cook was gone. The man standing there had the same face, the same calm eyes, the same steady hands. But the room could feel the difference. He was no longer pretending to be small. Samuel opened the folder. Mr. Hale is the founder and principal owner of Hale Horizon Capital. As of this afternoon, his firm has secured controlling leverage over the Whitmore real estate group, pending final board approval. A sound moved through the guests. Shock, whispering. One reporter lowered his glass. Charles' face turned gray. "You are Hale Horizon." Marcus looked at him. "Yes." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "You came into our home as a cook." Marcus answered softly. "I came into your home as someone you thought had no power. That was the only way to see how power was used here." Brooke looked down immediately. Madison's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness alone, but from shame. Victoria stood frozen, because the truth was worse than being tricked. She had revealed herself. They all had. Charles' voice hardened, but it trembled beneath the anger. This was deception. Marcus nodded once. It was. Then he looked around the room. So was your public kindness. So was the charity language. So was the way this family spoke about dignity while treating workers like furniture. Grace's eyes shone with tears, but she did not look away from him. Marcus saw her, and his voice softened. Not everyone here failed the same test. Silence settled again, this time heavier. Marcus turned back to Charles. I did not need to wear this apron to buy your company. I wore it to decide what should happen after I did. Charles had no answer. No one did, because the man they had ignored, mocked, filmed, delayed, and doubted was now the one holding the future of their empire in his hands. The ballroom stayed silent long after Samuel Reed revealed the truth. Nobody touched their drinks anymore. Nobody cared about the music. Charles looked older than he had an hour earlier. Eleanor sat slowly in her chair like her strength had disappeared. Brooke could not stop crying quietly. Madison stared at the floor. Only Grace kept looking directly at Marcus, not because she was fearless, but because she wanted to understand what kind of man stood in front of them now. Marcus walked toward the center of the room calmly. No anger, no triumph, just honesty at last. Samuel opened the acquisition folder again. With one signature tonight, Hale Horizon Capital could force a restructuring process that would remove the Whitmore family from leadership control within weeks. Charles closed his eyes briefly. So, this is revenge. Marcus looked at him for a long moment before answering. I thought it would be. The room went still again. Marcus continued quietly. When I first came here, I wanted proof that powerful people never change. I wanted proof that money makes people cruel. Some days in this house gave me exactly that. Madison lowered her head immediately. Brooke wiped tears from her face. Victoria stayed frozen beside the dining table. Marcus looked toward Eli standing near the doorway, then toward Grace. But I also saw something else here. I saw people capable of becoming better when forced to face themselves honestly. Charles looked confused. Marcus stepped closer to Samuel and closed the folder gently with his hand. No hostile takeover tonight. Samuel looked surprised. Even Victoria lifted her head sharply. Marcus continued. Instead, I want a restructuring agreement, public transparency, leadership changes, and a permanent foundation funded through Whitmore assets to support low-income children across South Carolina. Food programs, housing assistance, education grants. Grace's eyes filled with tears instantly. Charles stared at Marcus in disbelief. After everything our family did to you, Marcus answered softly. Punishment changes fear. Responsibility changes people. Victoria finally spoke. What leadership changes? Marcus looked directly at her. You stepped down from operations for 1 year, learned the community side of the foundation, before returning to business decisions. Victoria's face tightened, but deep down she knew he was right. Brooke swallowed hard. And me. Marcus did not hesitate. Public apology. Real one. No cameras styled for sympathy. No sponsor language. Just truth. Brooke nodded slowly through tears, because for the first time in her life she understood how much damage words could cause. Then Marcus looked at Madison. She already looked broken before he even spoke. Madison's voice cracked quietly. I know. Marcus held her gaze. You nearly killed a child because anger mattered more to you than attention to others. Madison started crying openly now, not dramatic tears, exhausted ones. Marcus continued calmly. You will oversee the transportation program for the foundation personally. You will meet the families affected by reckless driving, poverty, and neglect. Madison nodded immediately. Yes, I will. Eleanor looked overwhelmed. Why are you giving us another chance? Marcus stood silent for a moment. Then he answered with the truth he had fought against for weeks. Because someone once gave my mother one. Grace quietly looked away after hearing that. She understood then that Marcus' strength did not come from wealth. It came from surviving humiliation without becoming cruel himself. Charles slowly stood from his chair and walked toward Marcus. Pride still lived inside him, but something more important had finally broken through it. Regret. He offered his hand. I failed you in my own home. Marcus looked at the hand for a second before shaking it once. Then Grace stepped forward softly. What happens now? Marcus smiled faintly. Tomorrow, I leave this house. Grace's eyes dropped for a second, hiding disappointment. Marcus noticed anyway. He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. But foundations need honest people. Grace looked back at him slowly, and for the first time since entering the Whitmore mansion, Marcus allowed himself to hope for something beyond revenge. Not a fairy tale, not instant love, just possibility. Quiet and real. Weeks later, the Whitmore Foundation officially opened its first youth food center in Charleston. Brookapology spread online, but this time without filters. Madison worked directly with local shelters and never drove carelessly again. Victoria spent more time listening than speaking. Charles changed how staff were treated across every company property. And every Friday evening, food containers marked for Lily and dozens of other children left the old Whitmore kitchen. Sometimes Marcus visited quietly. Sometimes Grace joined him. They never rushed whatever existed between them. Some wounds heal slowly. Some trust deserves patience. But for the first time in a long time, both of them walked toward the future without pretending to be someone else. Sometimes the people we respect the least are carrying the heaviest stories. Marcus entered the Whitmore mansion wearing a simple apron, and almost everyone judged him before learning his name. Not because of who he was, but because of his skin color, his job, and the silence he chose to carry. And that is what this story is really about. The danger of deciding someone's value before seeing their heart. Kindness is easy when speaking to powerful people. Real character appears in quiet moments, in kitchens, hallways, parking lots, in the way we treat workers, strangers, and people who cannot give us anything in return. Marcus had every reason to destroy the Whitmore family. But in the end, he chose something harder. Mercy. Because truly strong people do not need humiliation to prove power. They heal what others would break. And maybe that is the most important lesson of all. People can change when truth finally reaches them. Brooke changed. Victoria changed. Even Madison began facing the harm she caused. Not perfectly, not overnight, but slowly, honestly. And sometimes hope does not arrive loudly. Sometimes it enters quietly, like a man in a kitchen carrying food for hungry children.